Welcome to this special occasion, the annual Robertson Lecture of the Residential College. I am Catherine Badgley, Director of the Residential College and faculty member in the RC Science program. We are delighted that so many of you are here today and excited to have one of our own graduates giving the Robertson Lecture this year. I have three brief historical notes. First, the University of Michigan sits on lands granted by the Anishinaabe and Wyandot people, whose treaties and human rights have been violated numerous times during colonization of the United States. This history is a reminder that we must dedicate our learning and scholarship to understanding the past and its legacies in the present and work to create a more just future. Second, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the RC Creative Writing Program. This immensely successful program has provided hundreds of former and current students with supportive instruction in many forms of creative writing, including poetry, fiction, and narrative journalism. We will be hearing from the head of the Creative Writing Program shortly. Third, the annual Robertson Lecture is named in honor of the first director of the Residential College. James Robertson was a professor in the English department and also on the LS&A Executive Committee. Robertson was part of the original planning committee for the RC in the mid-1960s. These were turbulent times in the United States and at the University of Michigan, with fierce debates about the Vietnam War, racism in society, and environmental degradation. This planning committee was committed to creating a new kind of educational experience, one that created lasting connections between faculty and students, that enabled students to have a larger role in shaping their own education, and that connected college education to the world at large. Many of the qualities created by the founders of the RC remain its foundation today, including commitment to self-expression, to learning proficiency in a foreign language, to social justice, and to experiential courses taught by a dedicated faculty. Fortunately, James Robertson lived long enough to attend the 20th anniversary of the RC and to see that this bold experiment was thriving. He wrote that his experiences as a teacher and administrator at the RC were the most satisfying of his career. In 2011, the Robertson family established the James H. and Jean B. Robertson Memorial Lecture to address topics in education and the liberal arts. It is now my pleasure to introduce Laura Thomas, Program Head of Creative Writing. Laura graduated from the RC in 1988. She double majored in creative writing and literature and Russian language and literature. Laura, please take it away.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you everyone for joining us for this year's Robertson Lecture featuring our own Laura Kozinski. As Catherine mentioned, this lecture is very special to the RC Creative Writing Program as 2020 marked creative writing's 50th anniversary. When Warren Hecht established the program in 1970, he designed the major around our signature tutorial format to mentor each student's writer's individual artistic growth and exploration. The tutorial format and the tutorials, for those of you who aren't familiar, are one-on-one private instruction opportunities. They've been both successful and popular. As undergrads, our students have won hundreds of Hopwood Awards over the years. They've established long-running campus literary journals, and some have even published their work even before graduating. As alum, our graduates have published widely and well in all genres and work in writing fields such as publishing, advertising, journalism, you name it, our RC writer grads are out there doing it. So we were in the early stages of planning a 50th anniversary conference on campus where we were going to bring alum and our current students together and have panels and celebrate our 50 years when the pandemic put a halt to those plans. So it means so much to our program to be marking our 50 years with this lecture by Laura Kozinski. Not only is Laura a world famous poet and fiction writer and our most award-winning graduate, she is also a kind, generous, and inspiring mentor to her students, her colleagues, and her fellow writers. For many years, I have been one of those lucky writers whom Laura has guided, critiqued, and supported and even seen through a few writer meltdowns. Laura truly represents the best of what our creative writing program has to offer. I'm real glad you have all joined us to celebrate Laura, and I'm also joining all of us in celebrating our alum who are out in the world writing and making art and literacy a part of their everyday lives. So with that, before I turn things over to Ken Mikulowski to say a few more words about Laura, I'd just like to take care of some housekeeping with you all. So we're coming to you today in a webinar format. And what that means is that we, the panelists, cannot see you, the audience. That means during the Q&A, you won't be able to use like the raise hand function, and you won't be able to wave your hand because we can't see your faces and we can't see those hands. So you have to submit your questions via the Q&A function, and there's a button at the bottom of your screens marked Q&A, and you can drop your questions in there anytime and they'll queue up in order. So if Laura says something during the lecture that sparks your curiosity, go ahead and just put your question right away so you don't forget about it, and then we'll go in order and get to all your questions during the Q&A time. This event is scheduled to go till 5:30. And just so you know, this is being recorded so that we can share in some electronic format later on, such as a podcast or video file that'll be accessible on the RC website. So again, this lecture will be available after we've wrapped up. One other note is about our reception afterwards. The reception will start at 5:30. They will be through breakout rooms. And so when Robbie is done setting those up, he'll have to set them up on the fly. It'll just take a moment. He'll drop the link to the reception rooms into the chat, and you can just click on the one you want to join. There will be 3 of them, and all the panelists, we're going to spread out through the 3 of them. You can stay in one the whole time and chat, or you can go to anyone you want and talk to other panelists. It's up to you. All right, and with that, I think that covers all our nuts and bolts. So now I would like to welcome renowned and beloved poet Ken Mikulowski, who taught Laura Kozinski poetry during her undergraduate days at the RC. And Ken, in a moment, you're going to share some thoughts about Laura with us and with the audience. Ken, here's your bio, so we can get to know your work, which we already know very well. Ken Mikulowski is the author of 6 books of poetry, most recently, That. His poems have been performed in Remember Me with Michael Gould and in 3 CDs by the Frank Carlberg Group. Ken taught poetry writing at the RC for 38 years, and along with his wife, Anne, he was publisher, editor, and printer of the Alternative Press. It's good to see you, Ken.
Thank you, Laura. Very, very fine. Now let me do a little bit of introduction for Laura Kozinski. Laura Kozinski, as an undergraduate, studied poetry writing with me and prose writing with Warren Heck. She won Hopwoods in both. In fact, she's the all-time Hopwood winner with 13 separate awards. I understand she beat Marge Piercy's 11. She won in both poetry and prose, and as an undergraduate and graduate student. She received her undergraduate degree from the residential college and then an MFA from English. After teaching in Las Vegas and Washtenaw Community College, she came to university with a joint appointment in the RC and English department, and now is the Theodore Roethke Distinguished University Professor. Her career as writer and teacher is tied closely to the University of Michigan. We are all very aware of her importance to both the RC and English department and are very proud of her achievements. As for her writing, let me say that beneath that charming exterior of domesticity, there lies the heart of darkness. She is not all sweetness and light in her writing. And now, let me read a poem of hers called appropriately, March. March. It is the murderer who got away with it, sitting on a park bench, thinking about snow and how it's over. Little flower faces peeking out of dirt to shriek, hello, while mothers wheel babies by, absurdly bright. Businessmen in amber, and the light on steeples served up in cones of white. But something here is also not quite right. Old lady in a girl's bonnet, ugly dog with a child's smile. Always, it seems, in spring, you'll find someone with regrets she's allowed herself to forget. Eye at the keyhole, milk in the saucepan, and that strange kiss that goes on and on and on. And now let me do the formal introduction of Laura. Laura Kozinski is a graduate of the Residential College and is now proud to be an instructor of creative writing in it, as well as in the English department, where she is the Theodore Roethke Distinguished University Professor. She has published 11 collections of poetry, 9 novels, a novella, and a collection of short stories. Her work has been translated into over a dozen languages, and 3 of her novels have been made into feature-length films. The recipient of the National Book Critics Circle Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Rilke Award for Poetry, and numerous teaching awards. Kasischke's 12th collection of poetry, Lightning Falls in Love, will be published in September. And now, Laura Kozinski.
Thank you so much. Before I start, I want to let you know that I'm so moved and so honored to have been asked to give this lecture. And I'm going to address that in my lecture. It's very meaningful to me. And in addition to feeling on the verge of a nervous breakdown because having been asked to do this is so meaningful to me, I also chose some things to read to you that I find very moving. Not that I wrote myself, because that would just be pathetic, but these are things that I have wanted to share with people like yourselves for a long time. And in so doing, I have chosen things to read to you that are so moving to me that I have not been able to get through my lecture in practice without starting to cry. I don't want to do that, which is why I'm going to thank Catherine, Laura, and Ken for the introductions in a little bit. So, because I didn't bring my raincoat. And I just wanted you to know that if it seems that your webinar lecturer today seems to be dissolving at any point, it's probably not your internet connection. I feel highly emotional about having been asked to do this and to be here in the Keene Auditorium with Rudy and a camera and some computer stuff. So I just wanted to give you that trigger warning. I'm the one who's triggering myself though. So before I say thank you, as I said, and start to sob unprofessionally and inelegantly, I want to share with you all a bit of great news that it's a saga that some of you have followed for a while. Because I was thinking about this lecture and thinking about all the people at the RC who've informed what I feel about what I'm going to try to share with you, and who informed me by teaching me and by shaping me as best as they could into anything after I washed up on the shores right out here on East University in 1980 as a piece of chewed up bubble gum stuck in a soggy wad of Kleenex with some unicorn glitter and a razor blade, dull razor blade, because I don't like blood and I want to live. But I was made into something I was not then. Well, while thinking about this and thinking about the people who've inspired me here, and having been asked to do this lecture, which, as I've said, is extremely meaningful to me, I started to think about something I lost exactly 13 years ago when we last changed residences. It is, and it was, a clipping from a book review, a kind of retrospective review of the writing of W.G. Sebald. I guess I only kept the part that interested me the most, so I can't read the whole review because I don't think it's on the internet. This was pre-internet. So I don't really know what it's all about now, but although I lost this clipping, I've been thinking about what's said in it for a couple of decades and trying, since I lost it, to explain to many of you, I imagine, what I thought I recalled what this clipping said. So I was thinking of what I wanted to say today and of this clipping and wishing I hadn't lost it, because for years I've been pantomiming what it's about and trying to explain without recalling the details of it. Well, I miraculously looked the other day just above the desk that I try to sit at every day and try to write, and I saw thumbtacked right at eye level this clipping, which apparently I tacked there because it meant so much to me I never wanted to lose it, but it was just too obvious a place I couldn't see it. Well, what mattered about it to me stayed in my head, and I was happy to see that it still lived up to the elaborations probably that I had in my memory of it. So now I can read it to you instead of pantomiming it. It references this painting, which is the first slide. Walking around the birthplace of Napoleon in one of the chapters in the book by W.G. Sebald about Corsica, he comes upon a museum which contains a surprisingly fine collection of paintings and Napoleonic mementos. Among the pictures, he is especially struck by one painting by the 17th century Italian painter Pietro Paolini. It shows a woman with large, melancholy eyes in a dark dress against a deep black background. Her right arm protectively embraces her small daughter, who stands in front of her with her grave face turning sideways, upon which tears have just dried. The little girl holds out the doll of a soldier hardly 3 inches high, perhaps in memory of her father who has gone to war. And this is a quote from the book. I stood in front of this double portrait for a long time, seeing in it, as I thought at the time, an annulment of all the unfathomable misfortune of life. As you can see, I underlined that quite a long time ago. I thought at the time of this painting as an annulment of all the unfathomable misfortune of life. Before I go on, I want to establish that we have only mortals among us today, because if you're an immortal, you don't need to hear what I have to say. But for you mortals who haven't left since I ushered the immortals out, I want to put us all together on a ship. I took that photo. It's a ghost ship, in my opinion. No one saw it but me, and then it vanished right after I took this photo, which is weird, I know, but it's true. I share it with you to segue into a thing that has made me sob in the past when I speak of it aloud. So let's just keep our fingers crossed that that doesn't happen. But so we're on this ship. While on that shore, this is a true story, by the way, I never make anything up, is the poet Conrad Aiken. He sees this impressive ship. This is a different ship, also impressive in my opinion. And he sees that painted on the side of it, or stenciled on the side of it, is the name Cosmos Mariner, which seems poetic, right? So that night, intrigued by the name of this ship, Conrad Aiken looks in the newspaper, which, since this is Savannah in the 1970s, is a real newspaper and has port activity published in it. He wants to know where we're headed on that ship, on our ship. And because the paper published where ships were passing through were headed, he could usually find that. But what he finds there is what is instead what a few years later will be chiseled on his grave. Cosmos Mariner, destination unknown. Where are we going then? We just don't know, do we? Now I'll say some thank yous. Should I get out of slide mode? I was incredibly moved by the introduction and honored to have been asked to give this lecture, as I've said. As you now know, Ken Mikulowski was my teacher here in the RC. But I'm glad he didn't tell you, as I hope no one here at the RC remembers, including Ken, is that I first met Ken because due to my first disastrous semester in college here, prior to taking his class, and because I was hoping to enter the Hopwood Awards he mentions, in order to do so, I needed to meet with an academic advisor, which Ken was then, to get me off academic probation so I could enter the awards. This was because my grades were so low that I wasn't eligible to enter the Hopwood Awards. I was sent by the nice people in the office to Ken, the advisor, with whom I was terrified to speak, and to whom I was also appropriately ashamed of myself to speak of my iffy academic performance at the University of Michigan theretofore. Ken was, of course, as Ken always is, very kind to a hopeless case washing up in his office. He went to a file drawer, we didn't have computers then, took out the file, looked at it, and I think I caught a glimpse of a flicker of a pang of uneasiness in his eyes as he viewed my transcript, perhaps thinking, well, okay, she's obviously not a foreign language whiz kid, but how could anyone possibly do so poorly in a mini course on mythological beasts? Well, I can tell you how if you want to ever do this. You forget that you signed up for the course until it's almost half over. Bingo. He gently asked me what I planned to flunk the next semester, and I told him I was getting my act together, taking only classes with art or movie in the title, and I guess he trusted me because he ticked a box, sent me off, I entered the Hopwoods, and after that, I took poetry writing with him for the rest of my life. And actually, I did get my act together, mostly, don't look at my transcripts, but pretty together, mostly because it occurred to me that I was incredibly lucky to be in the RC. And that if I ever had to leave, which I now have never had to do, I would have nowhere to go. So students out there struggling, go to those classes you signed up for, know what classes you signed up for, and then you need to do things like homework, which wasn't a concept I'd grasped yet. I learned that from the school of bad grades and academic probation. But from Ken, many other things I learned. For instance, that to be a writer, I should read a lot. I've never managed to read as much as Ken has because few people ever do or could, but I did learn from him that poets should read a great deal more than they write, and they should read before they take themselves too seriously as writers. I also learned to be less boring, I hope. Again, I've never managed to be as not boring as Ken, since few people are as unboring as Ken, but I don't think I ever would have had being not boring as a goal in either poetry or in life if I hadn't had Ken to teach me that it was a worthy goal. Thank you, Ken. Another instructor who saved and changed my life at the RC was Warren Hecht. Slide of Warren here. Did not going. There we go. Warren was slightly less gentle about how boring I was. He just flat out told me I needed to be more interesting, but like Ken, he embodied interesting because he was more interesting than I could ever hope to be and has continued to be. Warren is a painter, as you know, and a writer. Warren read my fledgling fiction, put up with it, but suggested ways I could be less boring, which helped me a great deal, although it may have been partly out of self-interest that he gave me this advice, because by then I was a creative writing major and he knew he'd have to read a lot more of my writing before I went on my way, which, what jokes on Warren, I never went away. My office was next to his for many years until he retired. But Warren made so much difference. He told me that fiction could be interesting, like poetry. And then he did for me what I now do for my students whenever I can. He lent me books he knew I'd probably never bother to get out of the library by myself, since I probably seemed like the kind of person who didn't know where the library was. But these were books I needed to read in order to understand what he meant by interesting. I still have some of those books, just as some of you still have some of my books. And please keep them. And I have more if you want them. Come by as soon as possible and bring your own boxes. But thank you, Warren. I have more to say, but I'll move into the lecture here for a minute. Of Cindy Sowers, another RC instructor who invented me this time out of, I would have been a junior by then. So I was Play-Doh, some splinters and cotton balls, some fibers of orange shag carpet that had been picked with some tweezers off of a rusty nail at a crime scene by that time. But I was changed by Cindy. After I lucked out to get in here back in the day before SATs were so important. So Cindy Sowers, I will speak of later in my lecture, or as I will prove at the end when I do speak of Cindy Sowers, I wouldn't have a lecture worth giving, since she's already said in 2 paragraphs all that inspired my lecture. Just as in the 2 classes, 90% of what has inspired my life was learned by being taught by her, and I'm not exaggerating. And Laura Thomas, my dear friend and colleague, who inspires me now every day to be a better teacher and human being and a better writer than I'd otherwise be by being all those things herself. Thank you. I can't imagine the RC without you. And I hope I'm long gone before you are, because rather often you are the beacon in the night that gets me out of bed in the morning. So now I move on. Some kids are playing around up in some caves on Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, Scotland. But it's 1836, so Arthur's Seat looks like this. It's black and white, right? Because the past was black and white. It was not. As stupid children will do, despite all their intelligent mother's warnings, these boys creep into a cave. In the cave, they find 17 miniature coffins, of which only this many survived those boys' tomfoolery. Inside the miniature coffins, they found miniature corpses, but they're pretend corpses. They're little dolls. They're not leprechauns or something like that. To this day, no one has any idea whatsoever what the hell all that was about. But we know, don't we? So, well, now, the class I didn't flunk my first semester is one of the many reasons I'm so moved to have been asked to give this lecture. Beyond feeling that the RC, which has given me more in my life than I can ever express in words, even with a thesaurus, that I have been trusted with this honor, another gift, one that's almost a bit uncanny, in the same way that sometimes when I'm teaching in the RC, I wonder, I have a flicker of a bit of the sense that actually I'm still a first-year student living in a mess of my own making on the 4th floor of Hayden Hall in this very dorm, and that I'm just dreaming a future that's not realistic whatsoever. But the class of which I speak, which I did not flunk, was my first-year seminar. Which registration and the mysteries of the registration process and great luck landed me in a small room in the basement here in East Quad with James Robertson, whose lecture series this is in honor of. I would say that I believe I didn't flunk that one because it was so important to me that I attended it, for instance, and I did my assignments because they were so interesting. I tried to find words while writing this lecture besides interesting to you, since I've used that one so much by now, but arresting and engaging are just highfalutin words for interesting. I now know. I doubt I made much of an impression on Professor Robertson, but he made a huge impression on me. He made me a better writer. I hope. I know I'm better. I don't know how good, but I know I'm better by, for one thing, pointing out to me that I was not infrequently being boring, or perhaps he didn't say that, but as someone who thought she was greatly improving her writing by using a whole ton of adverbs, and I owned a thesaurus, which I by now have told so many students about the story of the thesaurus that I'll probably be spending my final years in prison, because I still have this thesaurus, which I took out of my high school library and never returned because I didn't know you could just buy a thesaurus, and I wanted it and I felt I needed it. So basically, yes, I stole a thesaurus. I admit it. I'm not proud of it, but I still have it. And I used it until I didn't need it any longer. I thought it was my best friend, since surely I thought there was always a better adverb for, say, slowly, but I just didn't know that word. However, my little stolen friend thesaurus knew the word. So if there wasn't a perfect word to be found in my head or in my thesaurus, I just added more adverbs from my thesaurus until what I'd written approximated what I thought I wanted to say. I slowly, ponderously, prudently, and tentatively crossed the street to wait deliberately, purposefully, and intentionally for a bus to take me to the mall to buy some socks. Professor Robertson pointed out that really what I'd just written was that I'd crossed the street, waited for a bus, and that simply saying this would hurry things along to the mall to get the socks, especially since neither the mall nor the socks had much to do with my argumentative essay on animal rights. But he was also a model for me of a writer. He was working on the first of his 2 memoirs then. He would read to us from what he was writing, and kind of in real time, what he'd written that day, I believe, which astonished me. Before this, I'd had a lot of high school writing teachers, but only one to my knowledge actually wrote anything, since most of them had wanted to be football or basketball coaches and to teach high school math or science, because let's face it, the students in math and science are, I imagine, I rarely meet them, I forgot my thesaurus, so I don't know the word, but you know what I mean. They remember they were signed up for the class before the class was almost over, for instance, whatever that word would be. But here was this teacher, James Robertson, not only teaching writing, but writing himself. I will move on to my lecture soon, but I want in another moment to read to you a snippet from James Robertson's memoir and encourage you to read it. Also, I hope James Robertson's writing moves me into my lecture topic because it inspired it. Beyond his fine writing, what his memoir taught me was that there was a sort of sacred connection between art, the art of memoir in his case, and the humanity we share with all other humans, which includes the innocence with which we were born, which we all lose, and the fear we've known, and the shame and guilt we inherit at first and then earn, and our common suffering, which is inherent in our common mortality, our inescapable, however repressed, consciousness of the brevity of our lives, and worse, the fragility of the lives of our loved ones, the inevitability of our grief and our losses, past, present, and future, and the deaths that wait for each one of us, watching us from around some corner, readying a time and place for us, which we won't recognize as the last time and place for us until it is inevitably the last, but towards which we are always traveling, destination unknown. Art, I've learned from my betters, is that which makes no attempt to remedy any of this. The art of the living speaks of it for all of us, and the art of the dead is left, after they've left, to warn us and to comfort us and to show us how to live, and why, while we do live, how inseparable we are from them and from each other. Before I read it, though, I offer you this fragment of ancient poetry, which was translated by the living American poet Brooks Haxton pretty recently. However, the lines I will read to you were written by Anonymous, the most beloved of all the poets who ever lived, during an uncertain time, likely about 2,600 years ago, at least. An artist whose identity was left in a place unknowable to us, where unimaginable to us, where it was likely part of a much longer poem, which was sung or spoken by a human being like us, although maybe a slave or a soldier or a philosopher or a politician or a prostitute, we don't know. It was written down on papyrus, probably hundreds of years after that poet's death, by someone who was also forgotten, by which time, however, the new technology of alphabet had been invented by Bill Gates, not really, and drawn out of the collective memory of something important that was heard and passed down. We can never know the context or the entirety of that which was saved in another anonymous human being's memory to be written down. Only these lines have survived the fires and the floods, the wars and murders and starvation and disease and censorship of the centuries between Anonymous and ourselves, left behind after all the general destruction that's delivered upon all things by nature or as a result of the long, endless historical impulse of human beings to suppress the voices and to erase the lives of other human beings. But it lives, even as it anticipates its own annihilation. It's clear, uncluttered, and needs no explication. Everything is laughter and unthinkable dust. Out of nothing, without reason, comes what is. Now we spin forward 5,000 years. Sorry, I think that's how, maybe because I couldn't do the math, that whole BCE thing, going backwards and stuff, that never has made any sense to me. But now it's 1988. Which is the year James Robertson's memoir was published, whether or not it was the year he wrote it. He was reading to us from it in 1980. Similar theme, exact same humanity. Our troops were moving into German towns and cities encountering civilians, most of whom were fearful about their treatment by the Allies. The official policy that had come down from General Eisenhower was to consider them responsible for tolerating, if not actively supporting, Hitler and his atrocities. Consequently, there was to be, quote, no fraternization between our troops and the German civilians. I had some small hand in writing the so-called non-fraternizing instructions that went out to all commands. There was to be no friendly contact with German populace. They were to be treated decently, but coldly because of their collective guilt. Any infraction of this order would lead to a $64 fine, which is not a small fine then. Although most of us could see the logic in this non-fraternization policy, nevertheless, I don't think many of us thought it realistic. I certainly didn't, even when I was drafting the instructions. They rested on moral abstractions, which crumbled quickly when the Americans encountered old women sitting forlornly in the rubble of their homes, or Frauleins looking eager and available, or especially of little kids, standing silently, but hopefully, by the side of the road. It was those kids that got me. As the troops kept pushing deeper into Germany, temporary post exchanges would be set up in towns and cities along the way. I remember going into such a PX in Gladbach for my weekly ration of pipe tobacco and candy. When I came out, several little boys stood at a respectful distance and asked in small voices for chewing gum or chocolate. Looking over their heads, however, I noticed a small girl huddled in a gray blanket, watching with large, anxious eyes. Maybe one of the boys, she might have been thinking, would share his candy or gum with her. I knew she was a little German whose father, in all likelihood, had been shooting at us. But to me, she was also a wistful little girl, hungry for candy and kindness. After a quick glance to see that no officious MP was watching, I walked slowly up to the little girl. She looked apprehensively at me as if she were ready to run. I squatted down so I'd be on her level, opened my bag of candy, and took out a roll of Lifesavers. She hesitated like a timid animal, her large blue eyes moving from my face to the Lifesavers. I put the roll on the ground close to her and then added some chocolate bars and chewing gum. She reached out to touch this pile, perhaps to make sure it was real, and looked at me as if to ask, "Is this for me?" When I nodded and smiled at her, large tears rolled down her cheeks. Thank you, Professor Robertson, for all you did for me and for writing this. This is the sole sibling painting I'd choose to accompany James Robertson's writing. The painter's name is Katerina Wong. She painted this in the year 2010. It's called What Happens When You Die. Of it, she said that she wished to mash up physical reality with a child's spiritual understanding of death. Through art, she said, there are ways to open up and explore new ways of knowing human and animal nature, as well as subverting cultural and religious narratives to get closer to their distilled essences. Through art, she said, I can experience the world as a navigatable, ordered, and knowable place, while simultaneously glimpsing the beautiful, terrifying, and unpredictable power that lies beneath that mysterious space. Speaking of mysterious and mystical places and spaces, oops. Oh, then I wanted to read to you more that she has to say about her writing, about her painting. So she says of this painting, I began by splashing sumi ink against the surface of paper or dayboard. From there, working without self-censorship, I excavated images revealed by my subconscious. They are, in a sense, do-it-yourself Rorschach tests and became ways through which I could begin to understand the impact of profound chaos. What happens to us when the existential rug is pulled out from under us? In her book, The Secret Spaces of Childhood, my brilliant phosphorescent light-emitting colleague Liz Goodenough writes of mysterious spaces. I will read to you for a moment, but I want you to know that her work on the connection of the child imagination to the trust placed in adults by children, by the cosmos, I suppose, that entrusts these children to us, speaks to me deeply, as well as all she's said that I've heard her speak about space and place and the privacy of the imagination and the sacredness of these things. She has inspired me greatly. I think a lot about her and about her writing and what she has said and thought about things that I never have given a thought to or would never have until she inspired me to do so. And I think of her sort of subconsciously, probably, I think, and about spaces and this trust when I write. I can't really express it very well without a thesaurus, I'm afraid. And I don't have one because I don't steal or lie, and you should not either. But I want to read to you just from the beginning of the introduction to the book she edited. I was lolling with my 6-year-old son, Will, on a small beach near a rented house at Pocono Lake. Silent woods surrounded us, and we were alone this afternoon, without toys, electronic devices, or other children around to occupy us. I poked some ferns into the sand and formed a little circle of towering fronds, then carpeted the fern palace with emerald moss. Will and I hunted for strips of bark to construct a roof. Balancing rough pieces unevenly, we formed an entrance at one corner, making a kind of square-roofed woodcutter's cottage. To this, we added a loose teepee made from sapling branches woven together, and then fashioned an adobe hut with a smooth dome formed with wet hands over a fist-sized interior. When it collapsed, We used lattice twigs to prop up the round, dark space from within. It was an immensely satisfying afternoon for both of us. Later that afternoon, I was alone, rocking in a chair on our screened porch. Forests and ferns encircled the cottage, and conifers rose above the wooden eaves. While I gazed at the lofty space above, something strange occurred. Suddenly, my senses of large and small, inner and outer, merged, and I experienced myself both magically recessed on the porch and yet transported to the dark interior of our tiny fern palace by the lake. Although I imagine it's gone now, this space created by Liz and her son is certainly and was certainly a work of art. And I think she speaks there about what that inner space, that secret place and space made manifest on earth is and can be. So this is another painting by Katerina Wong. She's young and alive and in New York, but in her paintings, she speaks to the past and the future, the young and the old, the dead and the living. Although there's no snow in it, this painting puts us in, as does the other one, mind of the great last lines of the great writer James Joyce from his story, The Dead. The protagonist has just learned from his wife about the young man who loved her before the protagonist met her. And this young man died of love by singing to his wife in the cold and snow outside her window. His name, not the protagonist, the young man who died, who loved the wife before the protagonist knew her, his name was Michael Fury. Joyce gives us, in the worthily famous last paragraph of his story, a weather report, basically. But it comes to us from the weather of another country and was now another century, concerning those who came and left before we were alive to know what snow was. But perhaps it's the only weather forecast we ever need again or ever needed, the forecast of the weather that James Joyce knew was headed in the direction of all of us. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling softly on the bog of Allen, and farther westward, softly falling into the dark, mutinous Shannon waves. It was falling too upon every part of the lonely churchyard on the hill where Michael Fury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, on the spears of the little gate, on the barren thorns. His soul swooned softly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe and faintly falling, like the descent of their last end upon all the living and the dead. As William Carlos Williams also wrote of the news, which is always anything but new, I shared part of this long poem of his for the famous lines in it, but the poem itself is, it should all be famous. But what he has to say here about news is important to us, I think, at this time. My heart rouses, thinking to bring you news of something that concerns you and concerns many men. Look at what passes for the new. You will not find it there, but in despised poems. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. Hear me out, for I too am concerned, and every man who wants to die at peace in his bed besides. I just wanted to say that in my humble opinion, he's not being sexist using the word man. It's a poem about a flower and about love. And he speaks for all of us because language itself isn't sexist or offensive. People are. Language is a gift from somewhere, I don't know, and it was sent to us so that we might understand one another across and through and beyond the sexist offensiveness of some people we know who didn't get and never will get their news from poetry. We don't want to be those people. But speaking of time travel, I wasn't speaking of it, but now I am. Here we are, with those dear lost loved ones of our species, whom we'll never meet, but have always known. We're in a cave in Argentina now, some 9,000 to 13,000 years ago, Cueva de las Manos. These are the silhouetted hands of people who lived there, who used pipes made of hollowed out bones to spray the paint that left us the impression of their hands. 13,000 to 9,000 years ago. You can see that they're mostly left hands, which is how I guess it's known that most people having apparently long been right-handed, except for you supernatural, wonderful few people who aren't, because they use their right hands to spray paint on their left hands. Still, if you're left-handed, don't feel left out. There may be 829 left hands, but there are also 31 right hands. So the left-handed were there too. Why would they bother to do this? These are people whose average life expectancy was likely about 21 years old. Simply to eat dinner required more time and energy for them than it would take most of us on the internet today to build ourselves a new house to live in every single day. Well, in my opinion, these hands are here to tell us our hands were here. Take a look at your hands now. They're temporary. They're miraculous. Imagine your hands now in 13,000 years. Now imagine someone who lived 13,000 years ago reaching out to hold your hand, because that's what art does. This painting isn't going to feed you or beat you or hold your iPhone while you tie your shoe. This hand is going to touch yours to remind you that it was yours once, or it will be yours one day. That where these hands have gone now, we are going, but we don't go alone, hardly alone. We only have to go there alone if we refuse to take the hands that have been offered to us. Our own RC instructor and poet, Van Jordan, did not give me permission to quote from his essay in my lecture today, but it's on the internet and people are talking about it, so I don't need no stinking permission. The essay is about so many things, but I think it's about this, about the hands above all. Van loves movies, and one movie he loves is the 1972 movie about Billie Holiday, Lady Sings the Blues. This is my favorite photo and quote from Billie Holiday. If I'm going to sing like someone else, then I don't need to sing at all. But this is also pretty great of Diana Ross and the film in which she plays Billie Holiday. In his essay, Van writes about what he learned from seeing that movie many times as a child. And let us not leave movies, films, music out of this discussion. Freddie Mercury, I just said that. I'm not going to talk about Freddie Mercury, but like that's art. Although this lecture would go on forever if I could do justice to 1/100th of all the forms of art we find around us everywhere, art that reaches out to us. So Van writes in his essay, which is titled, "Ain't Nobody's Business If the Lady Sings the Blues." Oops, I think I have it here. What I learned from the film is that success comes from having love and support in one's life. You need someone in your life who will love you, even when you're not at your best. The person who loves you has seen you at your worst, but knows that the beauty you possess when you're at your full power still throbs beneath the surface when you're down on your luck. The good times can be as haunting as the bad ones. It was something I wasn't able to see as a child, but as I got older, I got hip. We get older and we get hipper, hopefully, Van did anyway, and art reaches out to us with all its hands to guide us to the cave where the little dolls wait to be released from their miniature coffins, thereby to show us how those who grew older and hipper than we have yet reached that state, survived their losses, faced their futures with others like themselves, who, however different superficially, were and are like us. You can't watch a movie about a singer or look at a painting left in a cave or read a poem or a memoir or a novel without learning the moral of the story of your own life, even though it's the life of someone else. You may find comfort there, even if the comfort comes only in the form of an acknowledgement of your suspicion that you aren't alone in your fear or your pain, that in the end, we cannot close the door on any other human being because we will meet that human being at the level of that fear and pain, love and ecstasy and laughter and dust in 11 miniature coffins, give or take a few. Another bit of ancient Greek by Fallacies, who lived some incalculable number of years ago, you couldn't do the math, and had a self-deprecating sense of humor, I believe, wrote this. On the character of the islanders of Leros. Lyrians I have found are bad, not one worse than another, all bad, except Procles, and Procles is Illyrian. Human beings, we are all bad, except for ourselves and the people we love, but we are all human beings with loved ones on someone's Isle of Leros. Well, I'm sure I don't need to tell you about the Kentucky meat shower of 1826. I'm sure you studied that in your history class. But in case you missed that in your history class, there was a meat shower in Kentucky in 1826. There are many things written about blood falling out of the sky in a rain shower, but there's only a couple of meat showers in recorded human history. And one of them took place in 1826 in Kentucky. This is an illustration, not a photograph. So Mrs. Crouch, a farmer's wife, was boiling animal fat one day to make soap. This is a true story, by the way, and not just about soap, which I'm glad we don't have to do melting, boiling animal fat to make soap anymore. When out of the clear blue, big chunks of meat started to slap all over the place, plop onto the ground. It looked like beef or a sign from God. Mrs. Crouch was obviously a catastrophizer, which I can relate to, because she instantly assumed that these chunks of flesh were her husband and son, who had somehow been blown up and then fallen from the sky all around her. But then luckily her son and husband came home in two pieces. They were separate people. And they were like, what's all this meat all over the place? The meat pieces were about 2 inches by 2 inches, although a few pieces were bigger. And they just, according to Mrs. Crouch, fell out of the sky all over the ground. It looked like beef, but somebody tasted it. Who would that be? Not me. And he said it tasted like lamb or deer or bear or horse or human. Not apparently, as everyone says about meat, you don't want to taste, but oh, you will like it. Your frog legs, they taste just like chicken. It didn't taste like chicken. There are some theories as to what happened, and the most likely one is so disgusting, although not violent, that I'm not going to tell you about it. The point is that this happened about 200 years ago. Then, just a few years ago from where we are now, the artist Kurt Gode, who teaches at the college with the coolest name ever, Transylvania University in Kentucky, became obsessed with this meat shower, and he started to go through various archives all over the place in search of an answer and for information and stories about what happened and what the meat shower was all about. Well, in his searching, he found in an archive, this is somebody who is thinking ahead to the future, this. It's a jar of the pickled Kentucky meat shower meat, which turns out to be a kind of keepsake from the meat shower. It was too decayed and disgusting to eat for anyone, I guess. So the artist took it to a laboratory where, I guess you can do this, its taste molecules were analyzed. And from the data he received, the artist had jelly beans made. And he went to a festival and handed out these jelly beans to people. that were invented to taste like the meat from the meat shower of the Kentucky meat shower of 1826. People ate them. I don't know who these people are again, but they ate them. And when they were asked, what does it taste like? They said strawberry pork chop or heavily sugared bacon with a metallic aftertaste. Strange indeed. Well, as I've said, there have been some theories about the meat shower, none of which are very violent or require trigger warning, but one of them, the most likely one, is so gross that I'm not going to tell you. You can Google it for yourself. Instead, why would you? I bring you this true story because no one knows. No one knows. So I bring you this story so that I can tell you what the artist Kurt Goad said about the meat shower and how the people who witnessed it, or I guess only Mrs. Crouch actually witnessed it, but a ton of people came from all over the place to see this meat all over the place. And then, one of them, I think there's only one recorded person who actually ate it, but so he did. After having received no answer to their question, after sending samples of the meat off to various universities where the great ones analyzed it and had no idea what it was, they had never learned what that was, where that meat came from, how it plopped all over Mrs. Crouch's and her husband's and son's farm. They just then went on with their lives. I'm assuming there were no more meat showers. They didn't freak out. Kurt Goad writes of this, and I believe he's writing about art here too. And this is a quote. People had a different idea then about strange things. They didn't always expect answers to their questions. Since then, our artist Kurt Goad has also moved on. He's now photographing from a safe social distance in Lexington, Kentucky, people and their lives during the COVID lockdown. So that's how I learned about the Kentucky meat shower. I was wondering, how does one write about this time? Maybe in a year, maybe in 10 years, we will look back and understand. We will have answers to some of our questions about how this has come to happen, why we didn't see it coming, and what it meant for us and what it will mean to the future. But I started thinking about that, and then I started Googling, and then I found him. So I'll show you a few of his photographs here. Again, Lexington in the time of COVID-19. Kurt Goad is our contemporary, and so are these people. And it's our pandemic too. I don't know about you about this time last year. I had a lot of things in my mind, and I have a pretty good imagination, but I certainly wasn't expecting this. I had not gotten to the point yet where pandemic was one of my fears. We don't really know why it's happened, but it has. And we go on with our lives without quite knowing what's next, or not knowing at all what's next, I guess. If this can happen, what will happen next? If we don't know why it happened, how do we go on? But in the meantime, an artist is telling the world, is showing the world, this happened. We were here. This is us now, which someday, if the world goes on, you future human will witness with us. And what happens to you, well, you will know what happened to us and how we lived, even when the context is lost. What's this? Well, this is Stonehenge. I know there are many theories about astronomy and the people who hauled these rocks there, but obviously there's no answer to that question. It's art. What says with more clarity than this, what art says? We were here and we tried to make sense of it, and we went on. And we obviously cooperated with one another, because it wasn't just a couple of kids on a Saturday afternoon who left this behind or this. How many people died before this work of art was finished? How many died making this work of art? But behold it, and try to imagine for 1 minute that they weren't there, that they weren't humans with a vision of the future in which one day we would see what they had left for us to see. So I had the transcendent experience of being a student in 2 of Cindy Sowers' life-changing classes. Since then, I've had the honor of being the colleague of one of the smartest and most artistic and empathetic visionaries I've ever known, Cindy Sowers. At a lecture she gave recently, she shared this with all assembled. And as I said, if I'd started my lecture with it, we could have skipped the lecture. So I did not start with it, did I? However, nothing I've had to say since I had her as an instructor has not been inspired by Cindy Sowers, and my lecture is the little withered leaf that fell off the mighty oak of this quote from Cindy Sowers. Each work of art that we study is our personal journey to recover the bodies of our dead from the cruel enclosures of history, the bitter camp of destruction. The study of art is not to take up arms against some enemy or to punish some villain or to denounce some person or group for thinking differently than we think. Our study is a funerary ritual by which we human beings recognize in the dust of the dead our own dust. As most of you likely know, Cindy is an artist herself. Here's my poetry class last fall in the gallery surrounded by her art. I miss you all so much. And this could be last fall or 9,000 years ago. I have the photographic evidence that it happened, but I can hardly look at you. I miss you. But we were here. We were there. We were together. We were surrounded by art. We were trying to make it. And thank you, all of you, for being with me that afternoon and for being one with me and with one another. I'm sad we aren't together now, but once we were, and so we shall always be. And I'm not going to cry. And I'm almost at the end of the lecture. I read to you this epitaph by Julianus Aegyptus, 6th century CE. As I have sung 10,000 times, though dead, I sing again. Drink up, and never mind the stains. Nobody wears anything for long except this coat of dust. But now I'm here with you virtually in our beautiful, empty Keene auditorium, but it's not empty because Rudy is here. He is my rock. I could never have done this without him. Thank you, Rudy. Thank you, Catherine Badgley, for stepping into the shoes or taking the hand of James Robertson to direct the residential college into the future. Thank you, Carl, for being another rock, and Robbie, and so many others. And thank you to all of those of you who've passed through, and those who'll return, and those who will not, but will remain in your truest essences in our classrooms and hallways with your backpacks and hopes and your tolerance and your empathy and your full humanity, which you've shared and which sustains us and with which we travel together better into destinations unknown. And if any of you have not been back for a while, you must come back as soon as possible because these 2 groovy dudes are still waiting for you in the basement of East Pod, which we used to call, as you can see here, the half-ass. Also, although many of you have strayed far by now, walked many a mile, as you know, your shoes remain. And if one day some officious MPs, to quote James Robertson, come by and ask what's with all the shoes, let's get these shoes out of here, failing to see the artistic impulse behind them, the human experience being memorialized and shared by the dangling of the shoes you left up there for us to contemplate. I just hope for the MP's sake that I'm not around when they try to take them down, because my goal in life now is to keep those shoes where they belong until time and gravity bring down that power line in an awesome shower of sparks and burning rubber soles. And when that day comes, and we know it will, I'll have this evidence that the shoes were there and you were there and we were together and we always will be. Thank you for sharing this time with me. I'm going to end with one last bit of ancient poetry, 2 blessings by Mineros, 6th century BCE. Be quick, my soul, for joy, as others later will be. So when I, with everyone I love, am senseless earth. May truth be spoken between you and me, and may all we do seek justice. Thank you so much for the honor of having had the chance to give this lecture. And now I guess Rudy takes it away to the reception.
Bravo, bravo, wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm applauding for the entire audience. Hopefully everybody out there is applauding at their homes. Hi, everybody. My name is Robbie Griswold, and I'm the RC Communications and Outreach Specialist and alum from the class of '07, Arts and Ideas and Humanities major. Let's just keep that applause going a little longer. Thank you so much, Laura. The journey.
Thank you. You can keep it down.
So hello, everybody. I'm so glad to come on the stage after such a wonderful speech. It's so wonderful to have so many students, alum, faculty, and friends all here to enjoy this lecture today. I will be facilitating the question and answer for the next several minutes. And so actually, I'm going to get that slide up before I get too far ahead of myself. So there's just the slide for that. I've got a few questions already teed up from the audience, and I encourage others to submit any that are occurring to you now into the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar. So Laura, let's get you started with this first one. What are some of the books, if you can remember them, that Warren Hecht told you to read?
Warren Hecht had me read fiction by poets. And I know he gave me an obscure and probably rather valuable book of short stories by Robert Creeley, the poet. And Laura and I still have that book. If you want it back, we'll see what we can do. So I know that. And also, I mean, he was very much trying to encourage me to read interesting language because I was not willing to put it in fiction. I thought fiction should have a totally different tone. So that's one I remember because I still have it, but there were many others. You know, Philip Larkin's novel. Philip Larkin is a poet, but Warren lent me his novel. And so that's what comes to my mind.
Great.
If you want to ask me later, I can probably take a photograph of Warren's stolen books and also my thesaurus. Sorry. I'm a thief.
This one isn't a question, it's more of a comment. This is from our own Stephen Ward. No question, just want to say, as a child of the 70s, how pleased I was to hear the phrase orange shag carpet.
Yeah, we had it. We had it. Lots of it. Wall to wall.
This is a big question, Laura. I'm curious how you'll tackle this one. What is your writing process like?
Well, I mean, my writing process is frustrating to me at times, but really, I wish I could say I get up every morning and I have a cup of tea, blah, 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 but I don't. I just try to write a little every day. And if you live long enough, which I highly suggest everyone attempt to do, it really adds up. So sometimes I write, and usually I write in notebooks by hand, you know, free write by hand with a pen is whatever you used to call that. Poetry lines kind of pile up in notebooks that I go back to and then try to turn them into poems. And when I'm working on a novel, which is usually the only other form, sometimes I knock off a strange short story, but when I write novels, again, you have to write every day. I don't wait for inspiration for novels. I do wait for inspiration for poetry, but because the world does not need to be wallpapered with my uninspired poems. But with a novel, you can't be in a high state of inspiration every day. But you also, you know, I know because I've done it before, you can't leave it for a month and come back to it and hope to pick up with any kind of inspiration that you left it with. So I just try to write a little every day. And I just think to myself, and this is true of my poetry writing too, I just think, well, I don't know if what I'm writing now is any good, but I can deal with that later. I mean, I don't know if others would think that I deal with it later, but so I try to have no editor, no filter, and to just keep at it.
Great. Okay, here's another one that kind of looks externally though. What do you think is in store for the future of creative writing? What changes?
Well, I was hoping it wasn't the future. Did I give you them? You don't want my prophecies. In the short, for the future of literature or the study of creative writing?
It doesn't say. So what changes do you foresee in publishing, topics, genre? It looks like it's not so much the like what people are going to be reading, how consumption might change, that kind of thing.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think there's a way to know. I mean, I think that that the world, or the publishing world at least, has finally begun to acknowledge the diversity of all the writers and the writing and the stories to be told and the poems to be shared. And so I think that's the hopeful new way, but I don't know what the internet is going to do to writing. I don't think we're going to always be fulfilled by tweets and Facebook posts, but I do think that they're a distraction, and that I fear that some of the people that I knew in high school who became writers did so because they didn't have computer games. So I think that there's much to do on the internet that feels creative and is very interesting, to say the least, but that also is perhaps wooing away some of the great voices that we'll lose, because it's, you know, it's a labyrinth that you never get to the end of it. You just can stay on it forever. Mm-hmm. So good and bad. And also, I don't know.
Who can? There's a number of comments coming in the Q&A that are interesting. There's a Nicole, a Haley, a Sophia, who all say things like, "Are you sure you don't want your Octavio Paz book back?"
Don't give me those books back.
I've had a guilty conscience.
If I don't notice it's gone. I have too many books. And you all have been in my office, you know. Don't let me get any more books. Well, Haley says, I'm a fire hazard.
Haley says, "I've carried a great burden of guilt with me from hanging on to several of your books since my time in the RC 12 years ago. Thank you, Laura, for removing at least."
Haley, I already told you, keep the books, but now your guilt, you are freed. Enjoy them or pass them on to somebody else.
Yep. And Sophia says, "Glad to hear of this tradition. I still have your haunted short stories by Joyce Carol Oates on my bookshelf." So there's
it's yours. It's yours. It's a gift.
For novels or for short stories, do you begin with any form of an outline or an idea of a beginning and end?
When I write in stories or novels, sometimes yes. I've written a couple novels where I knew the beginning, middle, and end before I started, and those are much easier to write than the novels, although I have found my way through I believe, it was Phillip Larkin who said that a novel has a beginning, a muddle, and an end. And I like to think I know where I'm going, but in the writing process, sometimes I think, oh, well, I mean, I've heard many writers talk about being inhabited, but their characters tell them which way to go. And my characters don't do that, but a lot of times I'll get to a point where I'll think, this is a dumb idea, and then I try to change it. So, but I recommend that, people who can make outlines. I make an outline and I lose it or I throw it away. And because you don't have to do that either. You can write a novel the same way you read one. When you read a novel, you don't know where it's going. I mean, unless somebody spoil it for you, or you read it before, or you saw the movie. And I find it pretty exciting to figure it out as I go along. But sometimes I don't find it exciting. Sometimes I find it to be exhausting. So you don't want my process.
Here's another question related to process.
Oh, no.
What advice would you have for someone who is just venturing into creative writing for the first time?
In any genre? Well, I won't ask that because it doesn't matter. I would recommend that you write a little every day, that you not think about the product of your writing until you're revising. Then you should think about it if somebody else is going to read it. But while you're writing, you should, as Katerina Wong said about her painting process, it comes from the subconscious. Let that happen. Think to yourself as you're writing, and this has turned out to be true of a lot of my writing. No one will ever read this. I'm writing it. No, but I mean, I think that even about things then that I do think somebody's read, at least my husband did. I try not to imagine what anyone would say about it, what anyone would think about it. And I think to myself, it's not good. I don't have to do anything with it. If it's shameful, I don't have to share it with anybody. And then you kind of get to the place, I think, that the whole point of the impulse of your being a creative writing major and wanting to write is about in the first place. You want to figure something out. You don't want to express what you already know. That's when you got to get the thesaurus out. You're trying to say something real and it feels like pulling teeth. No, you want to tap into the same place where, when you have a dream, you don't know what it's about, but it came out of your head. How do you not know? How could you invent these strange things in your mind unless you believe in something supernatural happening to you, which is fine too, but let that supernatural thing happen to you when you're writing. But just accept that you will surprise yourself as you write, and your writing will surprise other people, and you must be brave and you must commit to it. And as Ken said, you have to read and not be boring. Try not to be boring. There's one person's boring is another person's interesting.
For someone totally not boring, here's a comment and question from Cindy Sowers. Laura, you have done so much amazing research. You have poets from the past and rescue their enigmatic waving hands. Do you research and write at the same time?
Well, I read because you taught me to do that. And I look for images in art because you taught me to do that. But I collect things, and then I lose them. Like, I've already lost my clipping. So, but I learned from you, Cindy, how to find in ancient things, translated things, forms that are unfamiliar to me, voices long gone, and also in completely contemporary things, my inspiration. So I guess everything is like research since I learned from the best.
Let's see. What would you say to a former student who has lost her way, was wooed away by the internet age, and wants to come back home to writing and is overthinking it?
I would say there's the wonderful thing about wanting to be a creative writer, whatever age you are, is that you have been living your life, which has been storing up things for you while you weren't writing, but it's been storing up things for you that you now will write about. And it's luckily for us, it's not like figure skating, because if you wanted to be a figure skater now or start it up, it's too late. But with creative writing, it's never too late. And think of the time that you weren't writing as the time when you were becoming the person you needed to become to write the things you are now going to write, and then just do it. Don't wait for a fancy pen from off the internet. Don't wait to retire or get the right desk. Just get a pen or sit down at the computer and don't worry about where it goes. Just let it go. And don't regret the time you didn't write, because whatever you were doing then will be important to the writing that you're going to do now, that you committed to it by saying out loud and from people that you want to.
Thank you. Laura, that concludes the time we have for the Q&A. Thanks everybody for submitting questions to Laura. I wanted to just make sure I tell you now what we're going to do is we're going to send out in the chat of this meeting, this event, we're going to send out the link to the after reception at which you can chat with Laura Thomas, with Catherine Badgley and myself, and Ken Mikulowski will be there as well. So that link is coming at you here in the chat just momentarily. And what you'll do is you'll need to leave the event that we're in once you click this link, and it'll take you out of this event and over to the other one, and I will be over there shortly. So if you'd like to come to the reception, click that link. Make sure you know that the password is Robertson. That's important. The password is Robertson to get into that room so we can avoid Zoom bombers. And I'll see you over there in just a few minutes. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon. If you can't make it and come to the reception, hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll be sending an evaluation soon.